Welcome, everyone. This is Jamie Flinchbaugh, your host of People Solve Problems. And today we have a special guest with us, Mark Reich. Mark, how are you doing today?
Really good, Jamie. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, glad to have you on. So, a brief introduction of Mark. Spent 23 years at Toyota, learning and leading its management systems, and then moved on to the Lean Enterprise Institute. Spent 13 years there, spreading that learning. Currently acting as senior coach and chief engineer of strategy, and has a new book, Manager on Purpose, which centers around but builds upon Hoshin Kanri and all the wonderful things that comes with it. So that's what we'll talk about today. Um, so Hoshin Kanri, I'll say we probably don't have time for a full explanation of what Hoshin Kanri is and all its mechanisms. People can get the book for that. But what makes Hoshin Kanri unique or different from all these other ways of doing strategy development and deployment?
Well, that's a great question, Jamie. Um, I assume there are a whole lot of different ways, and I may well not know all the ways, but I think what makes Hoshin Kanri different, and I think it'd be good just to read the definition that's in the book because I think that helps distinguish what it is.
Sure.
And it came out of Toyota in the one of them was the pioneering company in this methodology in the early 60s that came out of the teachings of Deming. But I describe it in the book as a management system for strategy that defines midterm and long-term direction, objectives and targets, and annually builds alignment vertically and horizontally to the direction, manages annual execution to the direction, and develops the capability of people throughout the organization. I know that's a little bit of a mouthful, but that encompasses what I learned it to be when I led that activity in Toyota. And so I think it's more than defining your North Star or some future direction or some metrics for the organization. It's about clarifying the methodology and how to develop people based on that.
Yeah. No, and there's certainly elements of that. I've certainly seen strategy processes that sort of end with a presentation of the board, and that's kind of where it stops. And now you have a PowerPoint deck. Um, I think one of the more compelling elements of that in that definition is the vertical alignment and horizontal alignment. Um, and so maybe you can elaborate a bit on that. Is that alignment consensus? Is it simply understanding? And which of those is sort of harder, the vertical or the horizontal, in building that alignment?
Well, they're both hard. I think if you, and maybe I'll explain because that is the core concept of the methodology and it's in the book. They're very different. I would say if you take a step back and you look at some of the research that's been done across companies, horizontal is probably harder, is what's typically explained.
Mm-hmm.
But to do vertical is also critical and sometimes challenging. Vertical alignment is basically, if you've put forth the objectives and you've defined the long-term vision for the organization and the annual kind of objectives, how do you break those down in the organization and build alignment? Because this is meant to be kind of a both bottom up and top down process.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you talked in your book about solving problems, we want everybody solving problems in the organization. So people are going to be bringing problems up in the organization to leadership, and leadership has to define direction for the organization and kind of and a methodology to kind of take that tiered into the organization and break those problems down so people have ownership. And that involves that's the power of Hoshin Kanri, I think, to one extent, is defining everybody's role at each level and how they contribute to the overall objectives of the company. And that, I think, links through development of people at those levels. So that's kind of the the vertical piece
Mm-hmm.
at a very high level. The horizontal piece is, you'd say organizations struggle. I think sometimes organizations struggle sometimes because they define their achievement based on some often financial or some metrics in the organization that kind of cascade to individuals. And then those individuals think, of course, a lot of times their compensation is tied to that. they achieving that metrics becomes their primary goal, as opposed to achieving the overall objectives of the organization, which are naturally going to be broader than an individual function.
Right.
So what Hoshin Kanri, and it's kind of walked through in the book in fair amount of detail, is meant to do is define a management system to build that alignment across the organization. So when you have 3 to 5 objectives, for example, there's a way to know who's going to support whom and what specific sort of support they're going to provide and how that will happen, and some consensus building mechanism to do that.
Yeah, let me dig into that because I find a particular failure mode or just friction point in organizations around those broader goals is, people within different functions will say, but I am no longer in control of my own destiny. I'm no longer in control of my own success. I depend on others, and that's, they may not say it out loud, but that's not fair. And so that becomes a friction point where people strain about that dependency around support to achieve the goals. I So is this a forcing function, or do people have to get over that before they even embrace broader goals?
I think it's a cultural shift that organizations have to make. I mean, I think and I think it to a certain extent for that purpose, it requires a fair amount of I would say investment of time and thinking and engagement from the top leader in the organization.
Mhm.
Now, I state in my book that you can try this in a smaller area of the organization. Sometimes that's helpful just to see how it works. But whatever if it's the company, it needs to be the CEO. If it's, if you're going to take a portion of the organization, it needs to be the vice president or wherever you're going to do that, because you're going to encounter that type of friction in the beginning.
Right.
And part of that is overcoming, uh, I would say part of that is overcoming that. Like sometimes the CEO has to help overcome that, but it's also building a culture of a better culture of collaboration across the organization. And, one of the things I talk about in my book is there has to be, people have to be rewarded for, what I call leading by responsibility as opposed to authority. When you're in charge of people, I don't want to say leaders' jobs are easy, but it's easier than when you have to influence across the organization.
Mhm.
And so I think that capability, I believe, and it wasn't to, if it's effectively, uh, I would say promoted and people see that they advance if they have that, if they demonstrate that capability, and there's opportunities, the leadership development part, then there's opportunities to learn that capability or those capabilities. I I think it can help organizations adjust that and make that cultural shift.
Mhm.
Otherwise, I mean, I think too often it's really behaviors and often kind of like incentive systems that drive the bad behavior.
Yep.
People generally want to get along most of the
Right.
time.
So sticking with that those leadership challenges, right? And you kind of mentioned this as a way for leadership development with Hoshin Kanri. Um, there's a phrase. I used to be a soccer coach, and we would say the game is the best teacher, meaning we just want to get people playing into all sorts of different structures, and they're going to learn the game by playing it, not just sort of practicing drills. So, in the realm of Hoshin Kanri, is Hoshin Kanri teaching them specific leadership capabilities, traits, practices, or is it simply the playing field upon which they have a chance to practice it?
I think it's both. I mean, I'm a pretty big believer and this is from my own experience, that there's no better teacher than life itself and experience itself. And so, and that's why kind of my book is structured around a case study that shows the experience of a company going through this. Now, uh, the leader of the organization has to, because this is a fairly high risk activity. I mean, this isn't like doing a Kaizen event on a shop floor in a
Right.
one plant and organization where you might disappoint a few people. I mean, this is the future of the organization you're dealing with. So there has to be a good understanding of the risks, and I would also say the capabilities needed, like development needed of the leaders in the organization
Yep.
to tackle it. But I believe you have to learn this through doing it, because so much of the particularly the I would say the, let's call it, the interpersonal mechanisms that what we talk about in the book a lot about catchball with
Mhm.
vertical and, like you were just talking about, vertical and horizontal catchball. You know, vertical catchball is about development of people, so you have to practice that. And horizontal catchball is about how to build alignment across the organization, and you got to practice that. You got to put that in practice too. So I'm a big believer that you got to practice it.
Great. Well,
That answers your question.
it does. Lots of opportunities to practice with this. So you mentioned it's high risk, right? Because you're making big decisions about where you're headed and what work you need to do to get there. While we're recording this, we could characterize the world as volatile and uncertain. And I'm going to guess that by the time the episode is released, we can still characterize the world that way. Um, so when the world changes underneath you and you have a plan built with Hoshin Kanri and deployed and engaged and people are moving, how much of it is abandon the strategy, start over? Is it make adjustments within the framework? Is it stick with what you're doing and plow through? All of the above. How do you adjust using Hoshin Kanri when you're dealing with that kind of uncertainty and volatility?
I love that question. Thank you for asking it, because I think, and in the book, the case actually mid-year deals with a fair amount of like change in the market environment that
Mhm.
requires adjustment to the plan. Yeah, what was it? There's a famous Prussian military officer, Helmut von Moltke, that said no battle survives contact with the enemy.
Right.
So I think I think once you get into the plan, you can expect that it might change a bit, because you don't know all the. I mean, you're going to put together a plan. You don't necessarily know all the capabilities of the organization completely.
Hmm.
You don't know all the potential market forces. I mean, because you're speaking to the volatility, I think, externally, but there's volatility internally. I mean, in the middle of your plan, the important vice president decides to take a new position at a different company. I mean, those kind of things can potentially cause instability and necessary changes in the plan, I think.
Hmm.
But one of the things I learned of great value into it, I was talking about this with John Shook just about a month ago, is we put an incredible amount of effort into learning to plan. And that was like a fundamental skill. Particularly if you were in an administrative function in Toyota, or even in production, really, you learned to plan. And that was because uh, it built a core skill. I mean, if you plan something every month, every year, I mean, you learn how to plan, and sometimes and you learn how to build better plans. You know, you can't control the external environment all the time,
Right.
but I think so building that capability is important. Being flexible is important. But and I say that because you kind of brought up the point: should we shift? You know, and I'm not a big fan also of willy nilly changing the plan either. I mean, because it becomes too easy for an organization just to say, well, oh, we had this one change, so, or it becomes an excuse as to why we did, because some small external factor might have impacted our plan.
Hmm.
So I think you got to build good planning skills. The other thing, maybe just to mention, is I think that this whole idea we're talking about, and I don't think it's given enough, like, there's no science around it, no credibility around alignment and the power of that in changing and being flexible.
Right.
I think that's a learned skill, alignment in an organization. And when leaders, if you've got, that's why you need, if you have a somewhat stable group of leaders in the organization, and they've learned the power of quickly building alignment and you need to change direction, that'll happen pretty fast.
Hmm. Yeah, I fully support that theory. I think the famous quote of the plan is nothing, planning is everything
Right.
is in the spirit of we practice planning together and we can replan, we can adjust as we go because we built that capability. Um, so fully on board with that hypothesis. Um, I want to come fairly soon before we run out of time to problem solving. But let me first ask. I've seen Hoshin Kanri done well. I've seen it done poorly. I've seen it done lazily. Um, what are red flags for you if you see an organization, um, not doing it well, not doing it with rigor? What are the first red flags that you'll see um, show up that tell you that something's wrong there?
Well, so you mentioned a really important word there, rigor. Rigor is, I mean, to me, that's a pretty important distinguishing factor to just doing strategy and doing Hoshin Kanri. And that's the rigor of what we talked about at the beginning, PDCA.
Hmm.
So in the book, it's pretty clearly defined. And I would say the companies that I see do it well versus not, that have defined a lot of rigor around how they build their plan. And that can involve many things, like a good upfront understanding of the market, like all the stuff you talk. Of course, we always talk about in strategy, but understand customers. But then how do you, that whole piece we're talking about, how you build vertical and horizontal alignment,
Hmm.
and then how do you execute on that plan? And I think companies starting out with this need to have a fair amount of, I'd say it's monthly rigor. They set up what we call an obey. I call an obey. It's a large room where you can visualize progress of, are you ahead or behind, and understand status and see that, and then have a good process to reflect on that. Did you achieve your objectives or not, and where you didn't, how do you put things into daily management? So that rigor is required. And if so, you say you use the word lazily. I think if you I would I wouldn't even I would it's I wouldn't refer to it as lazy. I would just refer to it as like a recipe for like not having success.
Hmm.
You need to build good. And one of the things I talk about in the last chapter of my book about sustaining is you need to build standards. This is a process. And like I'm a Toyota guy, so I talk about a lot about process.
Right.
Hoshin Kanri is a process. So you want to build standards around it that keep it sustainable.
Right. Oh, I love that. And rigor is one of my favorite words. Or has become one. So I think we might be leading into this anyway, as you talked about a monthly rigor, and not just the upfront rigor, but at a systems level or a process level, how does Hoshin Conry and problem solving connect?
Well, I don't know. To me, I would that's a great question. I refer to, and I'm sure there's a slide in my deck. So I refer to me, Hoshin Kanri is just company wide problem solving. I mean, that's fundamentally what you're trying to do is define at a high level. I mean, the book is called Managing on Purpose for a reason.
Hmm.
And because what you're trying to say is, what's our purpose? And a purpose can be like very, very true north, like why you're in existence. It could also be like the purpose of like like the current business issue that's critical for you to achieve, to achieve your purpose. And then you can think about, okay, based versus that, what's our problems to solve as an organization? Are we growing fast enough to be competitive in the market? Do we have the right type of products? Do we have the right capabilities in the organization? Those are all, and so when people form these, strategies, or in the book, for Hoshin, we refer to them as their Hoshin objectives.
Hmm.
I mean, you can define those as problems. I mean, a perfect example in the book, it's about the case study is about a lawnmower company that's struggling to enter the electric mower market. They've struggled. They've got a prototype. They're not in the market. Okay, well, so that one of their objective is to launch that electric mower with the customer features that are needed. That's their problem to solve. Their problem is they don't have one. And you can kind of, if you frame each one of those objectives as a problem to solve, you can start to break that. In Twitter, we like to talk about problem breakdown. you can break down that problem into specific like elements that people can own in the organization. Like launching the mower might have some like product development related problems. It might have problems related to being able to manufacture it. It might have problems related to your perception or the marketing related to the company. Those kind of problems can all be broken down and become like into like really specific problems down to the like frontline level in the organization, and that engages everyone then in problem solving.
Yeah. I love that. Love that answer. I think the trying to find the interface versus simply defining them together is
Mm,
certainly more unifying in my head.
mm,
So one last question for you. It's really about the book, and I'm really just curious. Yeah, I think there's a false narrative out there in business, especially authorship, that managing's bad, leadership's good. I like the choice of the title "Managing on Purpose." I think 9 out of 10 people would have said, "Hey, why don't you call it Leading on Purpose?" Why did you call it Managing on Purpose?
mm. I kind of see those as two different things. And uh, I, I guess I don't want to be too. I'm gonna make this a little gray, but I would say that leadership is about capabilities to kind of demonstrate people should like how people should behave in the organization,
Hmm.
how to draw out their best capabilities, how to think about how to develop them. Management to me, I think about like a system. And so that and that was a core responsibility actually of leaders. Another core responsibility of leaders in Toyota,
Hmm.
it's your responsibility was to set up a robust management system because ultimately, if you worked in Toyota as a leader, you were told your job is to work yourself out of a job. And so it's not leader. So your organization, whatever size your organization, whether it's CEO or a vice president or a general, you're not, your responsibility is to build a management system that allows another person to step in. And that means building capability of the people below you, but it also means building a system, like we talk about in the book PDCA, that allows that kind of like self-functioning. So you can drive decision making lower in the organization. And you, as a leader, take responsibility to take on new and innovative like areas of the company,
Yeah.
as opposed to having get caught wallowing in the day to day, which is what happens a lot, I think, with leaders. So the management, to me, management is critical, and a management system to support that is part of leaders' job.
Love that answer. You help me change the narrative that management's important and needs to be done well and is distinct from leadership. So, Mark, thank you for coming on the show and sharing your perspectives. And good luck with the book.
It was great, Jamie. I appreciate having me on. Thanks.